Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward, and this is Face to Face. Our guest this week is Robyn Bunting. Robyn has worked in the child welfare system for the past 20 years in communities across Ontario. She is a former band councillor and now acts as the child welfare representative for her home community of Constance Lake First Nation in Northern Ontario. Robyn knows firsthand the impacts the system can have on children, having spent time in foster care and group homes as a young girl. Robyn, real pleasure to have you with us. Thanks for doing the show.
Thank you for having me.
You spent much of your life working in the child welfare system. Why is that something you've wanted to dedicate your life to?
It started when I was really young. I was a child. There was something happening with my family, and where we had to have intervention from the child welfare agencies. Back in the day, it was just mainstream. I was about maybe 11 or 12 or so, and I had to be removed from my home. So I know what it's like to be a child in care and to be living in home to home, and then to not feel safe in those homes where I would choose to sleep on the streets. So I was doing that for about a year, I think, during the warm months. So I know what it's like to rather, I prefer to live on the streets than be in care. So I'm trying to change it and at that time I said I was going to change it. When I grow up, I'm going to promise. I promised myself when I grow up, I'm going to make sure that no kid ever feels this afraid again, where they'd rather sleep, by the water or in the bush. So that's where I started then, and it's just been the way I was. My life is. My direction is to help people in child welfare.
Robyn, from stories and reporting that we've done in Northern Ontario, Constance Lake's about 500 kilometers away from Thunder Bay. Kids in Northern Ontario are moved so far away. Were you taken quite a ways away from your community when you were in care? Yeah,
I was down. They took me down south. I was in a home. I think it might have been by New Liskeard or Kirkland Lake. It's about maybe 5-6 hours away from where I live, but that's where they had sent me, and then in the group homes. So no, I was never placed on reserve. Everything that when I remember the ladies picking me up at my home, they drove me away, hours away, and I never came home until they just got tired of me.
You kind of touched on what your experience was. Can you tell us, I guess, what happened that you decided that this was going to be something that you were going to try and change for the better for the youth?
I was, I had found myself, there's a lot of bad things that happened to me while I was in the care. I used to get locked in basements, and I used to get strapped by people that were supposed to look after me. So I just didn't want it anymore. I ran away. And I was I slept by this bench because I didn't have no place to sleep. So I slept by this bench by a Safeway, and I was crying. I cried all night long that first night, and I said that I never want to, I don't want anyone to feel this way. I was so alone. And nobody was there to help me, right? No, I didn't have, or I felt so alone, and nobody was there to help me. Nobody talked to me through that whole thing until I fought with the child welfare workers, and then they just got tired of me, and I think they just sent me back to the res.
Well, you're now the lead band representative for Constance Lake First Nation. Can you tell us a little bit about what that role entails?
It's well, in short, I'm the lead band representative. I oversee a team of reps, which consists of advocates, family preservation workers, reunification workers, and cultural support. So what we do is we advocate and we support all Constance Lake First Nation members navigate through the child welfare system. That is our role. And we are mandated by the Chief and Council of Constance Lake First Nation.
Some people obviously saw the couple of stories that we had with you and your family that reporters Cullen Crozier and Kenneth Jackson did. They reported that in 2016 there were 2 apprehensions in Constance Lake. The next year there were 4. Today there are more than 30 apprehensions before the courts. What's been going on in Constance Lake?
That's the question that I've always asked. So the agency, the local agency, just got mandated in 2015, right? And we were fine for maybe a year, maybe 2 years, 3 years, maybe. But then, as of this year, I have about 30-some kids in court, and they were apprehended, right? And the agency felt compelled to do applications for society work for them. And I don't know what happened. I really don't know what happened. I can provide my opinions, but I really don't know. I'm still trying to figure out where it all went wrong. I think the bottom of it, the one that I can share, is that the agencies don't know customary care. They don't know First Nations customs and practices, and they don't want to respect that.
You mentioned, the increase in the number of children being taken into care in the community coincides with Kunawanamano, the Child and Family Services, taking on child welfare in 11 First Nations, including Constance Lake. This is a First Nations agency taking on child welfare. Would you not think that this would have been a better situation for the community?
Well, as my leaders have shared, the elders have shared, and the people that were involved in the planning process for Constance Lake, and it's a similar story right across with all the other First Nations under the jurisdiction. They had a good vision. Any First Nations child welfare agency that wants to take that control over child welfare, they have a good reason to do so, right? What happens within getting the mandate is with them. Conversations happen in-house, and then the vision is lost there. Because we helped them create it, right? The on the ground, us people on the ground, we helped them create it. The vision is there. We created it all for these agencies to stand up. But then I think in-house, I don't know what happens in-house, but that's where it goes wrong. There's no communication with the First Nations once the mandate has occurred.
As I mentioned, this happened in Manitoba. It's known as devolution. First Nations, Métis, Indigenous agencies took over child welfare, but we saw the numbers in the province when that happened go from about 5,000 kids in care to now 11,000 roughly kids in care. Does this have to do with the fact that they still, despite being Indigenous agencies, have to follow provincial, federal laws, guidelines? Do you think that has a role to play in all of this?
Yeah, I can tell you like what I know about child welfare, and I have no offense to all the frontline workers and child welfare agencies. I have a lot of colleagues in those agencies, but I know them. Speaking with most of the ones that I've been encountered with, they have to follow guidelines. They always reference ministry guidelines. Mm-hmm. When in their hearts, the First Nations workers, in their hearts, they know that it's wrong, but they're walking a fine line, right? It's their jobs, or it's their beliefs, and that's what they're put against the wall. And I know this firsthand myself as being a child welfare worker in my early on in my career. So I know what they are, but I've always been against come up with unique ways. So I've always tried my best to accommodate the First Nation, the families, and what I know in my heart and my beliefs that's best for the kids. And I had to fight tooth and nail with the ministry or the supervisors, upper management, to see that there are other ways that we can do it if we can work together. Sometimes I can make it happen. Sometimes I'm very persuasive, and sometimes I couldn't make it happen. So that's what's happening with the child welfare agencies now, is that it's the ministry just hiding behind First Nation space.
Robyn, we're going to touch more on that, but we do have to just step aside for a quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Robyn Bunting, the lead band rep for Constance Lake First Nation. And Robyn, we were talking about policies and legislations and First Nations agencies having control over the child welfare system. It's probably a good time to discuss customary care. And how would you describe customary care?
Customary care, so I'll tell you what I was taught when I first started being involved in child welfare system and then being a worker. So what I was always told by my elders and by my teachers, my mentors growing up, was that customary care is not the agreement that we have today. Customary care in child welfare is the way it's custom to the First Nation and how we look after child welfare. Through time, it went. It was defined. It was defined in many ways. Many people have tried to define what the terminology really meant. But I think at the end, where we're at today, is that it's a tool recognized by this in the CFSA, Child Youth Family Services Act, to give First Nations that voice for children in care. To give First Nation children that voice while they are in care, it's an agreement. It's kind of what everyone looks at it as, but it's not an agreement to me. When I talk about customary care, it's the customs that's important, and that's what's lost. And it's not about having children removed from their homes. It's not what it was for. It's not what it was intended for. That's what my beliefs and that's what my teachers have taught me throughout the years. But it works as a tool to avoid the court process, and that's very important too. If all the children cannot return to the home, customary care is a tool that you use just to avoid that court process and stop that clock from ticking.
Robyn, how different do you think child welfare would look if there were community-specific situations rather than writing policies in cities far away from where the impact is felt?
Can you repeat that question?
Just wondering how you think how different the child welfare system would look if it were, looking at community-specific situations rather than the policies being written in some big city far away from where the impact is.
Well, I could tell you that for us in Constance Lake, I can tell you that what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a prevention-based. And so, as you know, and I'm sure everybody knows that child welfare today, it's built on removing children from their homes, thinking that children are safer away from their homes, and when they're not. I mean, you're creating such trauma and that cannot be repaired, as we know, right? Removing a child from home cannot be repaired. So what I'm trying to do for Constance Lake First Nation with my team and my leadership is that we're trying to emphasize on the community supports in my First Nation, all the resources that we have on the ground. I've always said to the people that I work with that the answer lies at home. The answer lies within whatever you have. You are here, Creator made you for a reason, and that is you have something unique in you to bring to us and to your people. And everyone has it, and any First Nation, anybody really has it inside of them to help. So if I could build child welfare today, it would be all within Constance Lake First Nation. All the resources, all the elders, all the kids, the streets, everything. The earth, the water, the lakes, the creeks that we played by are all tools that we can use to keep our kids at home and keep them safe. Prevention, do the prevention. We can do it. I know we can do it. We've proven that, not with just this generation, but, with our ancestors and stuff. When I talk about my great-great-grandparents and all of them, That's where I get my thinking, is how they used to do it. And it's so easy. It's so but with child welfare today, it's so complicated. They make it so complicated. Why? Looking after a kid is not hard. But then there's so many obstacles in the way.
Robyn, those who watched the series of stories we did with you and your sister know that you lost your niece who died by suicide. A formal complaint has been filed with Ontario's Child and Family Services Review Board. Can you tell us about that complaint?
So, yeah, there was the child welfare agencies that were supposed to respond in a certain way, had said they were going to respond in a certain way, provided a notification to the First Nation. Again, to me, notification is not consultation. I always stress that, and that's my message that I want to get to everybody out there, is that notification is not consultation. So that's what the notification was sent to the First Nation, and there was no follow-up. My sister's family file was open for 10 months with no visits, 10 months without no visits, other than when my niece had passed away, and that was the last contact that they had with her and us. So I with my sister, her being so emotional and stuff, and again, me as being the family, the strong one in my family, I told her that we should file a complaint to the CFSRB. So we did. And then going through that process and talking with them, talking and understanding where, like looking at case files from the recommendations from the CFSRB, they were only recommendations. I don't want a recommendation. And the question that I had asked was, what could you do to help the agency, change what had happened? And the CFSRB response was, we can't make them do anything. We can't force an agency to do anything. The only thing we can do is make a recommendation. So I said, that's not going to help me at all. That's not going to help not only me, it's not going to help any other kid out there. Mm-hmm. So we withdrew our application. It wasn't going anywhere.
Robyn, much more to talk about here, but we do just have to step aside for one more commercial break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face with Robin Bunting. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Robyn Bunting. She's the representative for her home community of Constance Lake First Nation in Northern Ontario. And Robyn, since the stories aired on APTN about you, you've had calls from people across the country wondering, how your role came to be. Can you maybe talk a bit about that and see if there's any guidance you might be able to help with other nations out there?
Yeah, so I've had some calls from people all over parts of Canada, right? And the main question that a lot of the people that have asked me was, how do we get started? How did you do this? How did you make it happen? Very simple. Again, I always, if you know me, I always use the word, it's easy. People laugh at me, but it is very simple. So you have to remember that a band representative, back in the day, we used to be known as the fax machine. I think some First Nations are under that. We're more than that. The First Nations have to remember that as a band representative, you are the voice. You have the authority and you have so much power. So how to start is you have to get the funding to create the band, identify the needs in child welfare and the advocating and the support types that you need, and then apply for the funds. For us, we use the CHRT funding, the band rep funding, and we built from there. So that's what you need to do to get started. It's a very simple process. You work, again, you're mandated by your First Nation. You're not working with child welfare agencies. You're speaking for your people. So you build from there, and then you have to do it in tiers. You have to identify the levels and the type of advocating that you want. So for me and my First Nation, I've developed a tier system. I don't have time to talk about that today. I wish I had more time, but there are different levels of types. So one would be just a straight up advocating and support. Two, whatever that may be, but it could look the First Nation doing the child welfare and using the agencies as a last resort. Number three is that the First Nations do it all, everything on their own, run the child welfare agency on their own. The First Nation only. So that's the dream, right? Is that all First Nations, we want to have that control. So it's a very simple procedure process. You just have to trust your people. Trust that your people speak for the kids. They're the ones that are going to tell you how to do it.
Well, that dream you speak of is supposed to be the goal of Bill C-92, allowing Indigenous communities to take over jurisdiction of Child and Family Services, and that now has some funding attached to it. $542 million has been announced by the federal government. What would you use that money for? Where do you think those funds should be directed?
Okay, well, first of all, I'll say that that's not nearly enough that's going to be needed. We're going to need a lot more. I think 500, so we got 600 something plus First Nations across Canada. That's not enough at all. I'm going to say that right now. It's not enough. Maybe it could be enough for half of Ontario. I don't know. but for just for a band rep program, we're looking at least maybe just to get us started. I would say we are looking at least a couple million there. So for them, for that funding, it would be to start the process. That's all that with the 500 something that they have, they give it to the First Nations individually and let them guide the process on how to use those funds to create the dream. It starts from the ground. It doesn't start with PTOs. It doesn't start with agencies. It has to be the First Nations that run it.
Robyn, there's been a lot of talk over the last few years about the child welfare system, calling it the Millennium Scoop, saying that one day there'll need to be an apology for all of this as well. Do you think that there needs to be a federal inquiry into what's been taking place in the child welfare system?
I'm kind of trying to wrap, ever since my niece had passed away, and the stories that I've learned and experienced throughout all my 20 years. I used to see this back in 20 years ago, all the bad stuff and all the sad stories. I can't believe that it's still happening in 2020, where we are so advanced in many ways, but not in child welfare. First Nations child welfare especially, we're so discrimination is just unbelievable. And it's still happening. Agencies will say that they are not, but they are. And the reason why they are, it's the systems that they have forced upon us. The mainstream, the not only in Ontario but Canada. It's not our system. It's not the way we run it. So I believe that there should be an inquiry so that this. How do we do it though? Is something that and who do we involve? Those are questions that we need to
big questions for sure, Robyn. Sorry, I hate to cut you off, but we've run out of time. But I hope your message is getting out there, and I thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thank you.
That is all the time we have. We'll see you next week here on Face to Face.